It's one-on-one. So let's get started. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Shengwei Sun, a senior research associate at the Institute for Women's Policy Research. At the national think tank, IWPR builds evidence to shape policies that empower women and improve the economic well-being of families. The COVID-19 pandemic upended life for countless families and brought heightened attention to the plight of working parents. Recent IWPR studies find that during the pandemic, young mothers, especially young Black mothers and young single mothers, experienced a sharp decline in employment and prolonged economic hardship for their families. We're excited to have 4 great panelists today to have a discussion on the challenges young mothers face during the pandemic and how federal and state policies can be leveraged to help them recover from the pandemic. We will pay special attention to policies that will particularly benefit young mothers who are historically disadvantaged and explore what an equitable recovery looked like. A quick overview of today's agenda. We will have a brief overview of the impact of COVID-19 on young mothers, and then we'll introduce the panelists and have them share a little bit about the work that they do and the organization, the work of their organizations. And then we'll dive into a panel discussion on how federal and state policies can be leveraged to help young parents recover from the pandemic. We'll formally introduce them after the brief presentation. And a few housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar will be recorded and made available after the event. Please put your questions for the panelists in the Q&A session by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And we encourage you to use the chat function to connect with each other during the webinar. And you're welcome to introduce yourself now. We ask that you keep all discussion in the chat respectful, and we reserve the right to remove individuals from the webinar if they violate these guidelines. All right, a brief overview. As schools and daycare centers across the country closed, mothers with young and school-age children have borne the brunt of the care crisis in the United States. Compared to fathers, mothers have been more likely to exit the labor force prematurely, become unemployed, and reduce their work hours during the pandemic, due in no small part to the lack of a robust care infrastructure. The United States significantly lags behind other industrialized nations in public investment in early childcare and education. Despite overwhelming evidence that high-quality early childcare creates long-term benefits for children and society, childcare in the United States has been treated as a private obligation of families rather than a public good. Young mothers in particular face acute challenges in balancing work, education, and family care responsibilities. Many of them work in low-wage service sector jobs, which lack paid leave and flexible schedules. Young adults are also generally more vulnerable to economic downturns. And a substantial number of young parents are enrolled in school. Over 1 in 4 college students are parents, and 15% of all college students are single parents. The disruption in education and early career opportunities during the pandemic may limit young mothers' economic prospects for the years to come. In setting up the stage for today's panel discussion, I will first give a brief overview of the impact of the pandemic on young parents and young mothers. First, it might be helpful to know some characteristics of young parents. Most young parents under the age of 30 have young children aged 3 and under. Nearly 70% of young parents living with their own children are young mothers. Slightly over half of young parents are married, and a quarter of them are single parents living without a partner. Nearly 90% of young single parents are single mothers. In terms of labor force participation, during the pandemic, young parents overall experienced a significant decline in both employment and labor force participation, followed by a very uneven recovery. Among all working age parents, young mothers suffered the largest decline in employment and labor force participation between February and April 2020 at the height of the pandemic recession. At its lowest point in April, 58.5% of young mothers were in the labor force, a 6.5 percentage point decline from their February level. The data overall point to an outsized impact of the dual crisis in public health and economy on young mothers. Many young mothers manage work and childcare responsibilities while pursuing education. In the year before March 2020, about 1 in 10 young mothers aged 18 to 29 were enrolled at school. The share slightly declined in the year after the COVID-19 pandemic first broke out in the US. The share of young mothers who are neither employed nor enrolled in school increased from 34.6% to 42%, and the increase is the largest among young single mothers. Turbulence in the labor market and the collapse of a care infrastructure during the pandemic undermined economic security among young mothers, especially those headed by young single mothers. Drawing from a public opinion survey that IWPR conducted in June 2021, we find young mothers worry about economic insecurity long after when the economy started to rebound. A much larger share of young single mothers reported that they worry about paying their bills sometimes or every day than young married and young cohabiting mothers. The affordable housing crisis has become more acute during the pandemic, and we know that low-income Black and Latina women face higher eviction rates than their male and white counterparts. Our June survey data show that overall, 2 out of 5 young mothers aged under the age of 35 currently reside in a rental property. More than half of young mothers reported owning their home, but home ownership remains largely inaccessible to young Black mothers and single mothers. And as a result, their children are also at a higher risk for housing instability. Without strong policy support, young parent families will face prolonged economic insecurity even as the economy slowly recovers. Our June survey finds that young mothers overwhelmingly support structural policy changes that will alleviate their financial burden, especially for those who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. More than 70% of young mothers support raising the federal minimum wage, and more than 80% of them support forgiving all student loan debt and guaranteeing childcare assistance to low-income and working-class and middle-class families. Given that many young parent households have children under 3 years of age, investing in young parent families will yield long-term benefits to uplift future generations. We now turn to our panelists for a discussion on how public policies can be leveraged to help them recover from the pandemic. We're honored to have 4 panelists with us today. First, I'll give an introduction to each of them and turn the mic to them. Nicole Lewis is the founder and chief executive officer of Generation Hope, a nonprofit organization that surrounds motivated teen parents and their children with mentors, emotional support, and financial resources that they need to thrive in college and kindergarten, thereby driving a 2-generation solution to poverty. A former teen mother who put herself through the College of William and Mary with her 3-month-old daughter, Nicole now works every day to change the statistic that less than 2% of teen mothers will earn their degrees before age 30. Generation Hope rallies around teen parents to help them earn college degrees and forge a path to economic opportunity, and is now expanding its work nationally to help college and universities and policymakers across the country better meet the needs of the nearly 4 million parenting students who are working towards their degree. The second panelist is Michelle McGrain, who is the Director of Congressional Relations for Economic Justice at the National Partnership for Women and Families. Michelle manages federal policymaker relationships and directs legislative strategy within the organization's economic justice portfolio, with a particular focus on paid family and medical leave, paid sick days, equal pay, pregnancy discrimination, and workplace harassment. Prior to joining the National Partnership, Michelle served on the legislative team for Senator Barbara Mikulski and Congresswoman Jackie Speer. Outside of work, Michelle was part of the lead volunteer team that helped enact District of Columbia's paid family and medical leave law. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts and a Master of Public Policy from the University of Maryland. Our third panelist is Aisha Wells, who is the emergency paid sick time and paid leave organizer from Mothering Justice. In this position, Aisha organizes with mothers of color in the community to understand the pay leave issues in the workplace to help pass legislation. Before working at Mothering Justice, Aisha has interned at NAACP, helping with the Freedom Fund dinner and monthly membership meetings, and has advocated for her special needs son, Alex, since 2006. Aisha plans to start her master's in public administration with a concentration in nonprofit organizational management in fall 2021. And last but not least, we have Jessica Milley on our panel, who is a PhD economist with over 8 years of experience directing high impact research projects and impact evaluations with a focus on social and economic equity. As the founder of the Research to Impact, Dr. Milley utilizes a mixed methods research approach that helps organizations, philanthropists, and policymakers leverage data and stories to drive social impact. Dr. Milley has authored and co-authored more than 40 publications on a range of economic and social policy issues disproportionately impacting women and people of color. She has been widely cited in print, online, and radio news stories, including Bloomberg, The Atlantic, and Marketplace. She has been invited to provide expert testimony to state and local legislative bodies and on a range of public policy issues throughout her career. Dr. Milley is the co-author of a recent report published by the Century Foundation on how the Build Back Better plan would reduce motherhood penalty. And myself and my colleague, Jeff at IWPR, Jeff Hayes, will be moderating the panel discussion. To start with, we will turn the mic to the panelists and ask them to each share with us either their own journey as a working caregiver during the pandemic, or your research, or your organization's work on and policy priorities. And meanwhile, we encourage the audience to post your questions for the panelists in the Q&A throughout our discussion. Shall we get started with Nicole first?
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be here. Again, my name is Nicole Lynn Lewis. I'm the founder and CEO of Generation Hope. We are a nonprofit organization based in the DC area, but we are also advocating nationally now for student parents all across the country. So we have really informed knowledge of the student parent population, but also specifically under that umbrella, the young parent population. And I'll talk a little bit more about our work in those areas in a moment. Our mission, as we talked about earlier, is really all about ensuring that student parents have the opportunities to succeed and to thrive, to experience economic mobility. We believe that education is a powerful tool in that effort. And so working with student parents to ensure that they're able to complete a post-secondary credential, but also we have a 2-gen model that allows us to simultaneously help the children of students in our program as well thrive in elementary school, which we're really excited about. And we're doing policy work now, as well as work with colleges and universities all across the country to help them create more family-friendly campuses. This mission is rooted in my own personal story. I was a teen mother. I got pregnant my senior year of high school. And even though I was strong academically, I heard the same message that many young women hear in that situation, which is your life is over. You're not going to go to college. You're not going to be successful. And even then, I knew that education was probably the best way for me to actually provide for my child. And so I started at the College of William and Mary when my daughter Narissa was a little under 3 months old, and experienced so many things in those 4 years that many of the students we now work with experience, from how do you keep the heat on in the winter, how do you afford textbooks and baby wipes and diapers, how do you pay for childcare, how do you take care of your mental health in the midst of all of that. And then, at the same time, I was a college student, so navigating higher ed in a system that wasn't designed for me. So it was extremely difficult, but it was also transformative, not only for myself, but also for my daughter. And so you can see here, she walked across the graduation stage with me. 4 years later, I graduated with high honors, and it was just a surreal moment. But in that moment, I realized that my story was too rare. And so I wanted to make sure that other young parents were able to experience that same success. And that's really where Generation Hope came from. So our work can really be broken down into kind of two buckets. Our direct service work, which has been our core programming since 2010, really focuses, as I said, on helping teen parents earn their college degrees while also ensuring their children are able to thrive in elementary school. And we believe that that really results in this wonderful two-generation holistic programming. There really isn't anything that may come up for our students that we're not helping them with. It could be, can you help me renew my DACA status? It could be, I just had a domestic violence incident. We're really there to support anything that might come up. We also, in our second bucket, now do systems change work, and that's through a technical assistance program called Family U, again, where we're partnering with colleges and universities to help them create more family-friendly campuses, and then implementing student-driven policy and advocacy, which we've just launched our policy and advocacy agenda last month, and then we also release research and reports. Just a little bit about who our scholars are in our direct service programming, primarily students of color. They are qualifying as low income, 65% are first generation college students. They're navigating a myriad of challenges from domestic violence to mental health, all sorts of things that are in addition to them being parenting college students. And they all live in the DC metro area. A little bit about our impact, we're looking at things like completion, persistence. Are we able to support their mental health, making sure they're moving into jobs with family sustaining wages? And also, again, looking at not only the success of the parent, but also of their children. You can see here, we have some really impressive statistics that I think speak to, or outcomes that speak to the intentional holistic support being really critical for the young parent population and making sure that they're successful. Our systems change work is under these three areas. Again, our technical assistance program, we launched our first cohort of institutions in Family U in the summer of 2021. You can see who's participating in that cohort here. Our second cohort will be launching in the South with institutions there this coming summer. We also have our policy and advocacy agenda, which focuses on higher ed, affordability and accessibility, childcare affordability and accessibility, and overall economic mobility for young families, but also for student parents more broadly. We'll be releasing our 2022 specific priorities in those areas in February. And then we have three reports that we've already released that are available to the field under our research and reports umbrella. We'll also be releasing a fourth report in January. That'll be all about our early childhood program and lessons learned from implementing that program. And then lastly, this is how you can stay in touch. We're very engaged on social media. So after today's webinar, would love to keep the conversation going.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for your overview of Generation Hope. I saw there's some question in the audience about how to get involved, and you're welcome to respond to the questions. All right, Aisha, would you go next to speak a little bit about the work at Mothering Justice?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So I work with an organization called Mothering Justice. We are a social justice nonprofit that advocates for mothers of color through policy change. We do policy advocacy. We're a policy advocacy organization, and we empower not just Black mamas, but mamas of color to take action on policy issues that will improve the quality of life for families in Michigan and around the country. Currently, we have a mama's agenda that focuses on issues that keep Black mamas and mamas of color economically, that these issues commonly keep mothers economically disadvantaged. and that can cause economic instability. So we have is what we call our mama's agenda, and it has 4 different pillars. So it is Black maternal health. So on average, Black women die during childbirth 3 to 4 times more likely than their white counterparts. Our other issue is that we focus on is called safety net programs. So your basic health needs, which would be food, shelter, water, programs like Medicaid, SNAP, other types of bridge cards, food stamps, things of that nature. Those are the basic needs that we focus on, and then like improving those resources. Oftentimes they are very rigorous, they're very intrusive upon people's personal lives. And so in Mother and Justice, we're working to improve how those policies are administered in our communities and then changing policies with that. And then our other issue that we focus on is affordable childcare. So the average person pays the equivalent of the rent of mortgage to afford childcare. And as we've all seen during these past couple of years through the pandemic, that oftentimes most people couldn't afford or didn't have childcare. So at some points, as was mentioned before, you've seen millions and millions of mothers without affordable childcare. And then lastly, which is what I do, and the issue that I focus on, is paid family leave and earned paid sick time. So oftentimes people don't understand what that means, but paid leave is being able to take off from work to care for not just yourself, but a loved one or a family member, and to continue to be economically stable. Sick time is very similar, but the difference is that it's for a shorter amount of time. And so if you catch a cold, if you get like the flu and you're out for maybe like a week or 2. And so what I do at Mother and Justice is ensure that we have these policies, not just in Michigan, but also at the state level. So at Mother and Justice, we focus on those main issues. And just a little bit about me, what brought me to this work is I too was a young mother. I was pregnant when I was 19. I had my son when I was 20. But slightly differently, my son was born with severe multiple disabilities. He has cerebral palsy, he has hydrocephalus, he has epilepsy, he has hearing loss, vision loss, and he's severely multiply impaired. And like most mothers, you already are in so much fear when you have a child. It's a lot of anxiety that comes along with being a mother. So no one can prepare you for the type of adversity and ups and downs that you encounter by having a child with disabilities. And so again, you know, it catapulted me back into poverty, right? You become a young mother, you become a mother that is disabled. And so what brought me to this work is I needed to be able to help mothers like me that suffered for not having these policies in place. I just know all too well what it is like to finagle my schedule, to ask someone, can you cover for me? I gotta go take my son to the hospital, you know, and in doing that, it was because I couldn't suffer the repercussions of missing a few $100s out of my paycheck. When you are already making a low wage, you can nowhere near live without having a few $100s missing out of your paycheck. And so what Mothering Justice does, and which I think is just so amazing, is that we work on improving these policies, and that no one is making extreme life choices on a day-to-day basis. As we will continue to talk, that our country is severely and woefully behind in family-friendly policies, especially when it affects Black women and Black mothers. And so again, thank you for allowing me to be here today. Mother and Justice is also on a lot of social media. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, we are on Instagram. So please follow us on any of those sites. And you can also go to motheringjustice.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aisha, for sharing your own experience as well as the important work that Mothering Justice has been doing. We really look forward to delving into many of the policy issues that you mentioned and exploring how these policies should be leveraged to help, especially low-income mothers who are really struggling during the pandemic. So we'll get to that. Thank you. And speaking of paid sick days and paid leave, perhaps we could turn to Michelle next to speak a little bit about your work and work that National Partnership has been doing.
Great, thank you so much. So again, I'm Michelle McGrain. I'm the Director of Congressional Relations for Economic Justice at the National Partnership for Women and Families. The National Partnership was founded exactly 50 years ago this year, as originally as the Women's Legal Defense Fund, providing direct legal services to women. And we quickly found that the laws were just not in place to do what people needed to be done. And so we pretty quickly turned from direct legal services to policy change. One of our first big wins was the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, which essentially prevents employers from making hiring, firing decisions based on someone's pregnancy. And then we realized that women were still leaving the workforce and leaving employment around the time that they gave birth, or because they had other really serious caregiving obligations in their families. And so that led to the fight to originate and pass the Family and Medical Leave Act, or the FMLA, in 1993. And so basically since then, originally we always wanted it to be paid leave, but it was just not politically possible at that moment. So we said, okay, let's do unpaid leave. Let's come right back to paid leave after that. Almost 29 years later, we are still fighting for paid leave. So it's been a long slog. So I'm just going to give a brief kind of background and lay of the land on where the effort for federal paid family and medical leave stands. And I do just want to, make the point that when we talk about paid leave, maternity leave for new mothers is incredibly important, but that's only a small piece of it. Paid leave also covers leave for new fathers, because we know that men taking leave is one of the things that helps women in the workplace the most, because it's leveling the playing field and disincentivizing discrimination. We're also talking about taking leave to care for a family member with a serious medical condition. And again, we know that women do a disproportionate share of the caregiving work, not just for new children, but for all types of family members. And so again, making that gender neutral so that men are encouraged to take a larger share in the caregiving responsibilities in their families. And it also covers personal medical leave for your own serious health condition. And so going back to the federal kind of history lay of the land. So again, we passed the Family and Medical Leave Act, which provided unpaid leave to some workers in 1993. Over the last 29 years, the share of the workforce that's been covered by the FMLA has pretty steadily declined as the nature of work has changed and as more people have turned to part-time work, multiple jobs, changing jobs more frequently, small businesses. So a lot of people are left out of the FMLA, but we also know that the biggest reason that people cannot take unpaid leave under the FMLA is that they just can't afford to do that. It's, imagine working a low-wage job and then, you have access to unpaid leave. Who can afford to pay their bills during that time? So it's really inaccessible for a lot of people. And so in 2013, Congress introduced the Family Act for the first time, introduced by Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. It was based off of the two existing state paid leave programs at the time, California and New Jersey. And since then, they've introduced it every Congress, and 8 more states, including the District of Columbia, because we always like to include the District of Columbia in our state tally, have implemented and passed paid family and medical leave programs. So since then, we've learned a lot about what it takes to make an actually truly accessible and equitable paid leave program. So last Congress, when Democrats had the majority of the House of Representatives for the first time in quite a while, they decided to take up the Family Act and paid leave as one of their big initiatives. They held a whole bunch of hearings. They were getting ready to take legislative action, and then COVID hit. And so all attention turned to providing emergency paid leave and paid sick days for folks being faced with COVID-related issues. We picked back up the work this Congress as part of the Build Back Better agenda. So paid family and medical leave was a key part of President Biden's American Families Plan, and it's been a key part of the Build Back Better Act. So where things currently stand is that there is a 4-week paid family and medical leave program that's designed equitably to make it accessible for as many workers as possible. We know that 4 weeks is not a ton of time, but it's certainly a start, and it's better than the 0 weeks that the vast majority of the workforce has currently. I should mention that only, I think, 21% of the I think it's 21%, maybe 23%, Jeff can correct me, has access to paid family and medical leave through an employer, and only 40% have access to the medical leave side. So the majority of our workers, especially those who live in states that don't have paid family and medical leave programs, just don't have access at all. So even 4 weeks is a good start and something that we can build on in the future. A couple of other just points about paid leave. We've talked a lot about, obviously, young mothers on this panel. Mothers are the most likely to have to leave the workforce due to having kids or other caregiving responsibilities. So paid leave really is a workforce attachment program that helps people take the time off they need without losing their jobs or their income, and being able to return to work. It improves the health of new mothers, being able to take paid leave after the birth of a child. And actually, dads taking leave also improves the health of mothers, both physical and mental. And so there are a vast health and societal and economic benefits from paid family and medical leave. I'm happy to put a few of our recent resources into the chat in a moment. But so it's just, I can't, say enough how important this policy is for young mothers and women and men across this country. So at the current point in time, we're just waiting to see what happens with the Build Back Better Act in the Senate, hoping, it seems unlikely that it will pass by the end of the year, but hoping they come back first thing in January and pass something that includes the paid leave program that's in it. And so I can wrap up with that, and I'll turn it back to you, and happy to answer any questions in the chat.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for giving us a really detailed overview of the current status of the paid leave act within the Build Back Better plan, and we'll perhaps dive into that later as our discussion progresses. And I'll last turn to Dr. Milley, and before we switch to some discussion questions from the audience that we have prepared for you.
Great. Thanks to IWPR for inviting me to be part of this amazing panel. I'm really looking forward to the discussions. I promise I'll be really quick in my intro of myself. As Shengwei just said, my name is Jessica Milli. I am the founder and principal of a research consulting practice called Research to Impact. I just got started this year, so it's a very new and exciting endeavor. It's just me right now, but through my consulting practice, I work really closely with nonprofits and foundations to advance research that helps to shape policy and program development that can really help promote social and economic equity. I kind of am a jack of all trades. I work on a lot of different issue areas, including economic security, education, family-friendly workplace policies like paid leave, paid sick leave, even small business and entrepreneurship, innovation, sort of the whole gamut of issue areas. And I have a really specific interest and focus on exploring these issue areas through a gendered, racial, and intersectional lens as well. The bulk of my work recently has been focused primarily on childcare, paid family leave, and supports for underserved businesses. But likely most of interest to the attendees on this webinar is that I recently wrote a report with Julie Cashin at the Century Foundation that kind of explored the economic impact of the Build Back Better Act on the motherhood penalty, so specifically focusing on the childcare provisions within it. So I'm really excited to share a little bit more about that research a little bit later through our discussion. And kind of on a personal note, I'm the daughter of a mother who had us kids who, when she was really young, and she was attending a program at the local community college before I was even in school. And I still remember to this day her dropping me off at the daycare center on campus every day and how much fun I had there. But as an adult now, I realize just how important those types of programs and supports are for parents in helping them get that education and, advance themselves in their careers and help themselves support their families. So I think that realization has helped really drive and deepen my interest in this type of work to help support families. And lastly, I would just say that I actually started my career post PhD at IWPR working on all these issues. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity to join you guys again and continue this really important work.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We're so happy to have you and have you all here. And your speech just really makes me realize we're all products of this really important and underappreciated care work and the supports that are largely invisible, but are still critical and fundamental to the well-being of our society. So thank you. And that's why we want to highlight the aspects of the importance and value of care. So let us dive into the first question we have, and also combining it with a question from the Q&A. Before we delve into the policy, specific policies, can you share based on the perhaps student parents or low-income mothers or that you work with, or through your research and through your campaign work, tell us a little bit more about how have the dual crisis in the public health and economy induced by the pandemic impacted young mothers, and what are some challenges facing young mothers who are really disadvantaged and facing unique challenges, and what do they need today and in the near future, and also kind of just throw it into the mix. An audience asked, did the pandemic open new, is there any, so has the COVID-19 pandemic provided any positive opportunities for young mothers? So just about the challenges and experiences of the young mothers that you've worked with or you have seen.
I can go. I'm sorry. Nicole, did you want to?
You go and then I'll go.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're good.
I think one of the biggest things that that was helpful. So last year, Mothering Justice helped with passing out free diapers and free wipes to anyone who needed them. Going back to like safety net programs and how rigorous and how intrusive the processes are, we were able to pass out thousands and thousands and thousands of formula and diapers to so many families. All they had to do was write their name down, and that was simply it. It wasn't so intrusive for them to, it was very odd because they were used to like filling out so much paperwork, and then it was like, that's it. And we're like, yeah, because we're here to help. And so one of the things that we understood is that you cannot focus on doing any type of advocacy work or jumping in to talk to policymakers if you are worried about your simple basic needs, which is diapers and formula, which is one of the most expensive things that most young mothers have to pay for when they first start going into parenthood. So that was just one thing that we started to do. And then I'll stop there and allow Nicole to go. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to kind of
I totally second what you said. I think that's hugely important. I think taking a step back, I think what's important for people to recognize is that young mothers in particular, they were in crisis prior to COVID-19. And, when we think about their reality, it's layers upon layers of marginalization. I'm glad that we're talking about race in this conversation because it's so central to what is happening for young parents and what has been happening for young parents. They're more likely to be students of color or Black and brown mothers, for example. And so race plays a huge role in this. And when we think about which populations have historically been allowed to fall through the cracks, we're talking about Black and brown mothers, and especially young Black and brown mothers who have been stigmatized, marginalized, and ostracized because of their pregnancies. This is not a population that people rally around. And so because of that, COVID has had just devastating effects on this population. It's exacerbated these crises, whether it's housing insecurity, food insecurity. Aisha touched on, diapers and wipes and formula. And one of the scholars in our program described it as feeling like they were drowning. So having one crisis after another just coming and hitting at full force. And so, these populations have been allowed to fall through the cracks when it comes to educational opportunity, quality healthcare, employment. This is not a group that people have been really championing for. And I think, as we talk about what COVID-19 has created, I think there are some positives that have come out of this really devastating time. Some of those things are an acknowledgement of the role of race when it comes to our policies and our systems in this country. Race equity and has become kind of something that is talked about and discussed more. I think we have some time to see whether there's actual action behind some of these race equity statements, but there is an acknowledgement that there's something there. And I think particularly for young mothers, when we know that these young people are coming from racialized communities, that's a positive, that we are at least starting to talk about the role of race more in our systems in this country. But I think also we saw flexibility. I mean, Aisha just touched on it. We saw flexibility in COVID-19 that we really have never seen before in our lifetime when it comes to accessing benefits, accessing resources. And I think this is an opportunity for all of us to say, why can't we have this flexibility in perpetuity? This should not just be something that's attached to a pandemic. People should not have to perform their poverty, jump through hoops, and do all of these things to access things that they are deserving of. And so that's what I hope we can hang on to as we try to come out of this.
I would just kind of echo what Nicole had just said, specifically from the childcare side. I mean, we all knew that the system was broken to begin with, but the pandemic has really shown a really bright light on just how problematic the lack of access to reliable, affordable childcare is. And we're seeing these really dramatic impacts for families with young children. I mean, 1 in 6 people with children under 5 experienced a childcare disruption due to the pandemic. And of those people who experienced those childcare disruptions, some of them had really, dramatic impacts on their work and their careers. 28% had to cut their work hours, 24% supervise their children while working, which can have an impact on productivity and even, how employers perceive your dedication or focus on the job, which can also, as we know, have detrimental impacts to your career progression. 22% of these parents took unpaid leave, 20% left a job, and 7% lost a job because they were taking time away. So again, it really just highlighted the need for all of these policies and programs to support parents in, maintaining that balance between work and, family care.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, these are all really important aspects, and especially with regard to racial inequity and how to address that. So that kind of naturally brings us to the next question. Sorry, unless Michelle, you'd like to chime in, or are we okay with moving on to the next one? Okay, one on the policy. So how would the Build Back Better plan or other federal or state level policies that that could support young mothers and address inequities in accessing resources and support by young mothers from different socioeconomic backgrounds? Are there any successful examples you've seen, or what are the current kind of controversies or struggles that on that front?
Sure, I can speak to the paid leave portion, and then I'm sure some of my other panelists can chime in on some of the other things like childcare and child tax credit. In terms of paid leave, I think I mentioned before, but there is a 4-week paid family and medical leave program that's included in the version of the Build Back Better Act that passed the House of Representatives, and that's now pending in the Senate. This is our best shot at getting paid leave over the finish line that we've ever had. So we are all hands on deck trying to make that happen. Like I said before, 4 weeks doesn't sound like a lot, and it's certainly not sufficient to meet the full range of needs for new mothers and other folks engaged in caregiving. But it's a start, and it's more than the 0 weeks that most people have. And it's something we can build on. So that would be hugely beneficial to new mothers, to new fathers, to everyone, because we know that every single person is going to have some need for paid family and medical leave, whether it's to care for yourself or a family member over the course of their lifetime. So this would be a really, really monumental policy. And I can toss to others on the panel who want to talk about some of the other policies.
I would even add to around paid family leave. One of the provisions that I think is one of the best parts that they've added is the 90% wage replacement for the lowest wage workers. And so when we talk about young mothers, when we talk about women and the inequities that you face economically, one of the largest things is if you do take that time off from work, how you will still be able to afford things, right? And then if they have provisions that are like 50% of your wages, I only make $13. So what's $6.50, right? And so when they raise it up to the 90% wage replacement, which was more than what we asked for, so kudos and very excited about that. That is one of the provisions that I think is the most impactful to young moms that they can look forward to if they pass the Build Back Better the way that pay leave is wrote right now. I know that if I was able to have 90% wage replacement, the many times that I've sat in intensive care or at the hospital, I'm sure that I would have not faced evictions or homelessness or have robbed Peter to pay Paul. So I think that that's one of the most impactful things that we have right now. And I also just want to add that I think that there is a mindset change that needs to happen on people taking off time from work, right? I think that even with it being passed and it being available, I think we all need to get into the mindset of saying it's okay to heal, right? Saying it's okay to take care of your family, saying that it's okay to be whole when you return back to work. So I think that that is also something that we need to consider as we go further in writing these policies and passing these policies.
I can just speak really quickly to I think there are so many things in Build Back Better that are going to be beneficial to young mothers. The paid leave, huge part of it. I think as we're thinking about education and education being a kind of a propeller of economic mobility for this population, I'm not sure if people saw in my presentation, but fewer than 2% of teen moms get a college degree before age 30, fewer than 2%. So as we're thinking about how do we help young families move into economic mobility and family sustaining wages, education is a huge piece of that. And so I think when you're looking at the childcare piece of Build Back Better, it is hugely important for young mothers, because the bottom line is if you don't have childcare, you don't go to work, but you also don't go to class. You're not going to class, right? So it's one of the most formidable obstacles for young mothers and student parents. Build Back Better has the potential to provide some real solutions with universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds, but also affordable childcare solutions for other children, younger kids. And when we look at campus childcare centers, the number of campus childcare centers, as IWPR knows, has done great research here, has gone down, has declined over the years, where we want to see that number going up. And part of the reason for that is because they're expensive to operate, and they're too expensive for student parents to actually access. So we have a real opportunity with federal subsidies to be able to offset some of those costs, to be able to provide some real solutions. And again, going back to who are we talking about here, nearly 5 million undergraduate students across the country are parenting right now. Through a race equity lens, it's almost half of all Black female undergraduate students. The majority of the students who are parenting are students of color. So childcare is a huge, huge propeller of economic mobility for families, especially for young people and young mothers who want to go and get a post-secondary credential that could move them into family sustaining wages.
And just adding on to what Nicole had just said from more of an employment side of the childcare issue, As I had mentioned in my introduction, I recently did a report with Julie Cashin at the Century Foundation where we looked at the impact of the childcare provisions in Build Back Better on the motherhood penalty, and also, potential shifts in mothers' employment decisions. And we found that just kind of at baseline, there's a really substantial motherhood penalty for women who have young children under 5. It's about 14.6% of income for each child that you have that's under 5. And this penalty is significantly larger for women of color. But we extended this analysis and we combined it with previous research that had been done by Dr. Michelle Budig, who found that internationally increases in the shares of children who are in subsidized care actually significantly decreases the motherhood penalty experienced by mothers in that country. And so based on estimates of how many additional children could be covered by the child care provisions in Build Back Better, we estimated that those provisions would reduce the motherhood penalty by just under $2,500 per child under 5. And that these increased earnings, or the additional earnings that mothers would get as a result of that reduction, would add up to about $20.6 billion per year. And then we also did some estimates that looked at, how many additional women would enter the labor force because they now had access to reliable, affordable childcare. Data from the Center for American Progress, for example, showed that 51% of homemakers would actually start looking for a job if they had access to reliable care, and about 32% to 34% of part-time, full-time workers would increase their hours at work if they, again, had access. So, as a result of the Build Back Better provisions, we also estimated an additional $2.9 billion in earnings increases as a result of, more women entering the labor force, or, women who are already working, increasing their hours. So it's a really significant impact that we're anticipating if it passes.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Jessica, about your research on the impact of the Build Back Better plan, and also, all of you who speaks about the very aspects of how the Build Back Better plan could address the childcare crisis in various contexts and helping young mothers stay in school and in work. I guess as a follow-up question, but before that, does any of you have anything to add, perhaps other kinds of policies or state level policies that you think might worth mentioning here?
I'll just quickly mention, I know we're talking about mothers over 18 that were in your study, but I just want to name and call out the fact that we serve mothers who became they came into parenting in middle school, for example. So there's a population of teen parents that we're also wanting to really think about and consider. Maryland passed identical bills in 2021, which stipulate that the Maryland Department of Education implements a sweeping statewide policy to support young parents in high school. Less than 50% of teen moms graduate from high school. And it requires things like rooms in schools for breastfeeding. It requires that there are there's a contact within the school that can be a resource to parenting high school students when it comes to housing needs, when it comes to WIC and accessing certain public benefit programs. So I'm really encouraged by that. Would love to see more states doing that. There's still, there's a ways to go in terms of figuring all of it out. But the bottom line is that our education institutions are not safe spaces for young mothers, whether it's at the K through 12 level or at the higher ed level. And these bills like these they take us a step closer to really making these environments more safe and supportive for this population.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for highlighting that teen mothers aspects. And I think it kind of segues into our next question is, how can communities, schools, and employers, right, in addition to getting the policy support, how can these institutions where young mothers live, study, and work do better in making them a safer space?
I think one of the best things to do is have these most impacted people at the table, right? Oftentimes we are okay with cisgender, heterosexual, white men writing these policies, writing these laws, right? And we have followed that and sustained that for centuries. And I think the biggest thing right now is allowing the folks, the young mothers, the folks that are impacted to be at the table. You know, if they are strong enough and empowered enough to share their story, allow them to be in those rooms with lawmakers, with policymakers, so everyone can hear what is going on in their voices, and so that we write in these policies with them in mind, right? And that we're not writing in so that they can get $2 out of something. Like, that doesn't work, right? We're starting from the most vulnerable population, and we're making sure that it goes to every single person that is affected by it. And then the other thing I would add is, right now, the policies that are in place in our country, if there are some, right, again, they don't have us in mind. And so organizations, schools, jobs, entrepreneurs, you can go above and beyond when you write your own policies where you work at. You don't have to stop at what you see, right? You don't have to say, okay, well, the law says I can't do this, but you can do more. If you own an organization, or if you are a school board member or what have you, you can do more, and you can go above those policies that are already in place.
And I want to bring back something that you said earlier, Aisha, where it's super important for us to be normalizing these things, normalizing taking that time, taking care of yourself, taking care of your families, encouraging, fathers to take paid leave as well, because without normalizing, taking care of yourself, bringing your whole self to the workplace, things aren't going to change. So I think that's also a really critical component.
Jeff, or you want to have something?
I was going to pull a couple of the questions that have come in from the audience. Michelle was going to take one that came in on policies that would reduce discrimination in pay. Thinking about salary history bills and things, the other options we have heard about for closing the gender wage gap in general, but how they would specifically help moms.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of those types of policies definitely help moms and women in general. We've heard at length all of the barriers that moms, particularly young moms, face on this panel. And when women, get low paying jobs, or, are paid less than their male counterparts for one reason or another, that follows them throughout their career. And that's, the purpose of the salary history ban legislation is that employers can't rely on previous salary history and then, have that underpaid labor compound over the years. I'll also just mention that, I think it kind of works both ways, in the sense that new moms and young moms benefit from pay discrimination legislation like the Paycheck Fairness Act, like salary history bans, but the other policies that we've been talking about also work to close the gender wage gap. So things like paid leave, childcare, help keep moms and women attached to the workforce. They help keep their earnings up and don't cause that kind of dip that you see when women have kids or have caregiving responsibilities. So the anti-discrimination and pay discrimination legislation is really helpful for moms, but also these other policies are helpful for closing the gender wage gap.
And maybe in the last minute, thanks, Michelle, but in the last minute, could Nicole, there's one there about models for childcare on campuses. Did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I'll be really quick. I think it's a great point about childcare centers on campuses being on the decline and some closing in COVID, too many. Some of the things that we're encouraging institutions to do is to think about providing stipends. That's one of the things that we do at Generation Hope. We provide monthly stipends to our scholars that they can take and access quality childcare in their communities, as opposed to us building a brick and mortar childcare center. So that's something to think about. Also, IWPR has done some great work on possible partnerships between Head Start programs and college campuses. And I would say just more broadly, there are opportunities to partner with daycare centers, childcare centers, and quality childcare programs in the community, whether they're being run by nonprofits or by private entities, but those community partnerships are also a great opportunity.
Thanks. Shengwei, you going to wrap it up, I
Right.
guess?
Yeah,
Okay.
so we're perfectly on time, and thank you so much, all the panelists, for sharing your insights. We really appreciate all that share about the work that you do and bringing the attention to teen mothers, mothers of color, and low-income mothers. And so, thank you so much for that. And we hope, and thank you for the audience for engaging with us. We hope today's discussion will serve as a springboard for continuing the conversation on this important topic on how to support young mothers. Again, our video will be available on our website shortly. And so thank you. And we'll keep looking up for the good fight and connecting down the road. All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending.